Someone woke up with an attitude.
Cancel culture is canceled.
You know what woke means? It means you're a loser.
Why do you think you haven't been cancelled yet? I don't know. What's being cancelled?
Wake up.
And welcome back to episode 2 of the Woke What Cancel This podcast. On this episode, we're going to talk about school bullying. It is getting increasingly worse throughout the U.S. And joining me today, we have Tracy L. And Tracy is a mother of 2 from here in northern New Hampshire. Hello, how are you?
Hi, good morning.
So I got to ask you, I've been bullied in school. I spent a lot of time growing up, and it didn't matter in elementary, grade school, middle school, high school. It was all there. You have gone through a similar experience. Your 2 kids have done the same. Tell me a little bit about what happened in your life when it relates to school bullying.
Well, when they were in grade school, I'd say maybe kindergarten through 6th grade, it wasn't an issue. It was actually very good.
Okay.
When they both went into the higher grades, that's when the bullying began. And I think that's probably age-related.
Right.
You tend to see that happen in children that, 13, 14 years old, you really start seeing it. They both were bullied quite extensively for various issues. The typical things. I mean, I think every child has dealt with some sort of bullying at one point or another.
Right. But
in my case with my children, it was pretty severe. It got to a point where they both became very depressed, suicidal. One of them even made an attempt to take their life. And, if you want details, I can get into a little bit of that.
Sure, be my guest.
Well, it wasn't so much bullying with the students, although that was there. It didn't really become a problem until it was actual teachers that were doing the bullying.
Really?
Which was something I had never experienced in my own experience in school. I was bullied also as a child, but I never, ever had a teacher that bullied me. So it took me back quite a bit, and I didn't know how to handle that, because how are you supposed to go to the school and complain about what's going on when it's the actual part of the school system that's...
I was going to say, I have literally never heard of a teacher doing the bullying. I mean, they're supposed to be there to help the students.
Exactly. So I didn't know how to handle it, because it was the first time I'd ever... And it wasn't just one of my children, but both. And it was happening several years apart, because they're not close in age. Okay. So when it happened the first time, it threw me back. But when it happened again, I'm like, this is an issue because it's a totally different teacher. Now, don't get me wrong. The schools, the teachers that I have experience with, with my children, they've been wonderful. I've dealt with amazing staff. This is not an issue where the whole school is bad. It's like, you get a couple of bad cops, the whole department isn't bad.
Right.
Same. So I didn't know how to handle it, but I knew I had to do something because, of course, they were suicidal. So I went to the principal of the school and explained the situation. And in both cases, now we're talking years apart, in both cases, I was told, unless your child, him or herself, comes to us and explains to us what is going on, there's nothing we can do. And I'm thinking to myself, as a child, if you're being abused, that's the last thing you want to do. You don't want to draw attention to yourself. You don't want to go to the school and say, so-and-so is bullying me, especially a teacher.
Right.
I think that's a huge weight to put on a child that's already struggling emotionally.
Well, exactly, because you never know what's going to happen to them. Is it going to become worse? Is the bullying going to become worse? Are they going to be singled out?
Right. Well, that was their biggest fears. Like, I'm not going to go to the principal or this teacher and complain for fear of retaliation.
Right.
I think that is one of the biggest issues that I personally dealt with, that these children have no safe place to go when they're struggling, and usually they go to their parents. If you can get a child that will come to you and tell you, Mom or Dad, this is what's going on, you're already ahead in the game. But when the parent can't take that to the school and investigate that, or you get shut down, where do you go?
Exactly, because there are very few resources for parents. There literally should be, because there are some resources to the kids. But again, it's the same thing in your job. If you try to go out and you single somebody out in your job, you worry about the repercussions. And it's the last thing that we should have to worry about as a society. to have to face retaliation because we're exercising freedom of speech, expression. We're trying to explain a problem with somebody. I think everything should literally be easy enough that you could go to someone, explain the situation, have an investigation opened up, especially in this culture. I mean, come on.
Right, exactly. So I think, I'm the type of parent where when I would get the school policy book, I would read it front to back.
Mm-hmm.
And I always would focus in on their zero tolerance bullying policy. That is a joke.
Yeah, no kidding.
When you can't go to the school and say, this is happening to my child, and nothing is being done, where's the zero tolerance? Nothing is being done. Problem continues.
So have you thought about actually going to the school board, or did you attempt anything like that?
I had gone to the school board, I had gone to the superintendent, and I got the same answer. It got to a point where I realized I was just beating my head up against a brick wall. I was getting nowhere, and my children were getting worse. Their grades were failing. I pulled them out. I pulled them both out of school and homeschooled them.
And you said this has been going on for what, 10 years ago? 10 years now.
That was 10 years ago.
Okay.
So I can only imagine it's still continuing, because I've spoken to other parents who told me, hey, this is what's happening. I know you had this situation with your son or your daughter. What did you do? And I didn't have answers for them, and this is still happening.
Wow. And the sad part about this, too, is the school district, and we're not mentioning any names with any of this, but these are small town schools, too.
Right.
And the one thing about small towns is we have always prized ourselves at being a close-knit community, but that's not always the case.
Right, exactly.
So do you think, even in the small towns, do you think a lot of the whole bullying issue is because there are lax policies? Is this something that we would pin on parents as well? I
think it's a combination of poor policy, not following through on their policy, and lack of training, really understanding what these children are going through. I think they could make huge improvements if they were to change their policy of, well, the child needs to come to us and complain.
Right.
Like as if the parent's word is not good enough. Or at least have a meeting with both the parent and the child.
Well, exactly.
That was never even suggested to me, because I'd asked them, I said, can we sit down and discuss this? And nope, he or she needs to come to us first. And I was just blown away. I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
Did your kids ever get to the point where they didn't want to go to school for fear of what's going to happen on any given day?
Every day. Oh, yes. That was the reason why they became suicidal.
Unbelievable.
They were terrified.
We should never get to the point where our kids are thinking about committing suicide because of something that happens in school. School is supposed to be a safe place, but even with school shootings, bullying, stuff like that, I don't think I'd want to deal with having my child in a public school right now.
Right. I mean, even way back when I was in school, I dealt with bullying, and some of it affected me as an adult. But it was nothing compared to what my own children went through.
And the bad part about it is it's getting progressively worse every single year. We're seeing that. And like you mentioned, it is affecting test scores. It's affecting education. More people are pulling, just like you, pulling the kids out of public school for fear of safety, for fear of repercussions. But not only just that, is that they really want their kids to get the education they deserve, and it's getting increasingly more difficult in public schools. Right.
And when I pulled both of mine out, they excelled academically. They just took off.
And it's the atmosphere.
Because they didn't have, it was the atmosphere. They didn't have that constant fear of what if, what next. They could just focus on their schoolwork.
A couple of statistics that I come across. In the U.S. alone, 1 in 5 students ages 12 to 18 have been bullied during the school year. Approximately 160,000 teens have skipped school because of bullying. Students who reported that they were frequently bullied scored lower in reading, math, and science, and their peers reported that they were never or rarely bullied. Sixth grade. I found this kind of interesting, but I think it kind of goes along the lines of what you were talking about. Sixth grade students experience the most bullying at 31%.
And I think that might be the result of the transition from the small grade school to the high school.
Right.
Or the middle schools.
Yeah, because kids are, they're developing more at that age. Elementary school is kind of more fun. It's a better learning environment.
When adolescence, when puberty hits in.
Exactly. And they become more aware of their surroundings. They tend to figure out if they want to get more upset, depending on which direction they want to take in life. 42% of students who reported being bullied at school indicated that the bullying was related to at least one of the following characteristics. 30%, I found this incredibly sad, physical appearance. So 30% of kids were bullied because of the way they looked.
That's not surprising. That was the biggest issue when I was in school. That was what they focused on, was how I looked, what I wore, or what I didn't wear. I didn't have, the brand name clothes, and my hair wasn't done a certain way, and and my children were both picked on for the way they looked, but not only so much what they look like, but their last name.
Interesting.
If you were associated with somebody they knew that they considered not as cool or a problem, they automatically judged you as you must be like that too. And I noticed that was a huge issue. Being in a small community, everybody knows everybody. And your last name, as soon as you say somebody's last name, you're like, oh, you must be related to so-and-so. I don't know if you see that in a bigger city, but I noticed that here, that your last name holds a huge amount of weight.
I don't think it's so much in the bigger cities, because there are so many people that nobody really looks at something like that. But the whole appearance thing, now that's a whole nother ballgame. I remember being in school in the 80s, and one of the biggest things I had is I was always a fluffy kid, and I'm going to use the word fluffy because it's the other F word that I enjoy other than fat. But I was kind of an outcast. I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I took mainly to computers. I was the kid in the principal's office that would hand out the detention slips. Why they let a kid
I was
do
the hall
that?
monitor.
Were you really? Okay, so see, we were kind of on the same wavelength. Nobody was going to like us anyway, because you know what? We handed out the bad news. But I remember being bullied with my appearance because, I was fat. I was an outcast. Everybody thought I was gay. And I had birth defects that basically caused me to produce excess fat. And one of the biggest things I had as a kid is I had man boobs, but they were on a kid, that was 12 or 13. I was bullied so bad, I actually went to my parents and I said, Mom, I said, can I have an operation to get rid of, these big breasts? And I remember going through the surgery at 12, 13 years old. And yeah, it was absolutely crazy. I had a double mastectomy because I thought that my physical appearance, if I could do away with having this excess breast tissue, that I would be accepted more in school.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. So I actually got out of the surgery, got out of recovery. I was out for, I think, maybe 2 or 3 weeks of school. And I went back to school, and 98% of my class looked at me, and they started laughing, and they said, oh, my God, Al got his boobs cut off.
Oh,
and
that's brutal.
I felt so small when that happened. And it just created a snowball effect, because no matter what I could do. And then I had another issue where I had to have 6 pins put in my left hip. So I was in the hospital again, age 13, for another 3 or 4 weeks. I got back to school, and everybody was laughing because I was on crutches. I couldn't change it. I couldn't do anything about it. It's something that happened. That's just something I had to get through. But the kids were so bad that I literally, and I went to school every single day. I did it. I didn't want to. I had thoughts of committing suicide. I actually attempted it. When I was 16, I got my driver's license, and I remember going down this back road, and roads in New Hampshire, they're not straight. They're curved all over the place. So I was doing about 65 down this back road, and I was heading right for this tree, dead center.
Yeah.
And I was less than 100 feet away from that tree. I swear to God, something grabbed the wheel, put me back on the road. I pulled over. I was friggin' hyperventilating. I couldn't believe it. I just burst into tears. And I, to this day, because I wondered, I'm like, all right, I'm like, God, what is my purpose on this earth? I mean, am I here to be humiliated? Am I here to be put down? He said, no. He said, you know what? I've got something better for you. It was 2 years after that I actually got my start in radio. I come to the realization that, you know what? I'm here. My purpose in life was to make people laugh. And if I did that to one person a day, then I knew I was going to be bigger and better than any bully that had ever given me 2 shades at school.
That's an amazing story.
It's crazy. It's crazy. But it's the one part of my life that I will never forget. And the bad part about it is, and this goes to show, well, I guess it's not really a bad part, but it goes to show you the difference of kids then to after we grow up and we realize how bad things were, how bad we treated people. 60% of those people that bullied me are now friends on Facebook.
That's funny you mentioned that, because I've actually had that same experience. That the majority of the ones that really gave me a hard time in school, we're friends now.
Yeah.
You grow up and you realize, gee, that was wrong. But where do we intercept that between school and adulthood and try to speed up the process of recognition that this is wrong? How do we help those kids, the bullies, understand this is not right? Exactly. And if we don't have the help of the school staff to do that, then we're just going to continue down this path.
And that's really the sad part, because with everything that's going on, and we all know that bullying now is probably 3 to 4 times worse than what it was when we were in school. And
Right.
We've just proven that with our stories, and especially the stories of your kids, that how many more lives, how many innocent lives have to be taken for people to stand up and say a change has to happen.
And you know what I think has made it worse? We didn't have the internet when we were in school.
No.
So when the bullying would take place in the school, when I left school and I went home, I was safe.
Yes.
I didn't have to deal with it no more. But now, today, kids come home and the bullying is brought online.
It is.
And the kids don't know how to stay off these social media, the Facebooks and the Instagrams and whatnot. So the bullying continues, and it's constant, and I think that's what's made it worse. You and I experienced.
And it really has, too, because the internet, and I don't know, I've talked to my wife about this, too, and it makes me wonder, the people that created the internet, if they realized just how bad it was going to be. Because
I don't think they did. I really don't think they did. I think they know it now.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't think they did at the time.
No, because I bet you 10 to 1, if they could have gone into the future and seen exactly how bad the internet turned out to be, they would have maybe thought again about doing it. And I don't know, maybe it was all because of money.
Or doing it differently.
Exactly.
Somehow.
Exactly. And I think that's another thing that people need to look at, is they need to look at change. They need to look at how it's affecting kids, how it's affecting parents, how it's affecting education, because we already know that the U.S. is kind of going down in test scores. And it used to be, we thought really highly about education, but it doesn't seem to be the plan anymore. It seems like we are continuing that downhill slope with no hopes of reconciling it or getting anything to be any better. A couple of things too is I found a couple more statistics that I want to pass on. Bullying is a behavior. It's not an identity. When you're in school, I remember looking at a bully thinking, all right, this is who they are. This is their identity. This is their thing. But labeling a student as a bully can have a detrimental effect on their future and often limit their ability to change their behavior. Do you agree with that?
Right. I absolutely agree. I don't think it's the case for everyone, but I believe that it continues on into adulthood. They end up, with run-ins with the police and in jail, and because it stays with them.
And a lot of people believe that bullying isn't about resolving conflict, something that's going on. A lot of people believe that it is a form of control. They want to control the narrative. What do you think about that?
That makes a lot of sense.
So you would mention, taking your kids out of school. They've been out of school for 10 years. They're doing good. Have you, and you have mentioned hearing other people's stories about their kids being bullied. Are a lot of parents that you're talking to thinking about the same thing, about taking their kids out of school?
Yes, there was a couple that just recently did, and there's others that are seriously considering it because they're getting nowhere. They're in the same predicament that I was in. No answers, no way to help their child, and they're desperate.
Wow. Absolutely incredible. It's sad.
Yep.
It's absolutely sad. All right. Well, Tracy, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today. I've had a great time. This has actually made me feel better talking about this and realizing...
Very cathartic.
Yeah. And there are so many more people out there that are going through the same thing. I do want to bring up, there is a No Bully Help hotline that parents and students, teachers can get involved with. It's 1-866-488-7386. Once again, 1-866-488-7386. So make sure you call. Don't be shy. Make your voice heard. Yeah, it's crazy to think about, but we need to come up with better ways to protect our children online, in schools, and around the town. All right, Tracy, thank you once again.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Woke What Cancel This podcast. We do it every 1 to 2 weeks, depending on what we can come up with for subject matter. And God knows the world gives us plenty to talk about. That is for sure. If you'd like to be a guest, meaning you have something you'd like to say, maybe a subject that you'd like to cover, WokeWhatCancelThis at yahoo.com. You can find us on Facebook and, of course, our YouTube channel as well. We'll see you next time. I'm Al Lockwood.